The station floated in the darkness of space like a metal flower. It was massive, larger than most cities, and it held the strangest collection in the galaxy. The Empire called it the Grand Menagerie. They were proud of it. They had spent 200 years gathering creatures from every corner of known space. They put them in cages. They studied them. They showed them to visitors like prizes. Had been inside Habitat 7 for 63 days. He counted each one by scratching a small line on the floor near his sleeping area. The guards never noticed. They rarely looked at him closely. To them, he was just another animal. He was 29 years old. He had been a Marine in the Human Republic before a patrol ship caught his transport near the border. There had been a fight. His crew had died. He had not. Sometimes he wondered if that made him lucky or cursed. The habitat was designed to look like Earth. There were fake trees made of plastic and metal. There was artificial grass that felt wrong under his feet. There was a small stream that recycled the same water over and over. They had tried to make it comfortable. They had failed. There were other humans in nearby enclosures. Could see them sometimes through the transparent barriers. An old man who never spoke. A young woman who cried every night for the first month and then stopped. A family with 2 children who tried to pretend everything was normal. None of them could touch each other. None of them could truly talk. The barriers blocked sound unless they wanted them to hear something. Was in the habitat next to his. She was a scientist, who had been studying alien plant life when they took her ship. She was small and quiet, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. The guards treated her like she was invisible. This was their mistake. She had learned to read lips. So had they talked through the barriers in silence, their mouths forming words that no one else could hear. She told him about the station's layout. He told her about the guards' patterns. Slowly, piece by piece, they built a map in their minds. 3 levels above them, in a habitat built to contain fire itself, lived Ember. She was the last dragon. Her kind had once ruled an entire star system. They had been proud and ancient, older than most civilizations in the galaxy. Then the came. They wanted the fire cores that burned in every dragon's chest. They said the cores could power weapons. They said the cores were too valuable to leave in the bodies of beasts. They hunted the dragons for 50 years. They killed thousands. They took their cores and left their bodies to rot on empty worlds. When only Ember remained, they decided she was too rare to kill, so they put her in a cage instead. She was enormous. Her scales shifted between deep red and black like cooling lava. Her eyes were gold and ancient and full of memories that would break a lesser mind. The suppressors built into her habitat walls kept her fire weak. She could produce only small flames now, barely enough to warm herself. But she remembered what she had been. She remembered what she could do. Through the transparent floor of her habitat, she could see the levels below. She could see the small shapes of humans moving in their fake forest. She had watched many species in her long life. Most broke within weeks of captivity. They gave up. They stopped fighting. They became what their captors wanted them to be. The humans did not break. One in particular caught her attention. A male, strong but not large, with dark hair and calm eyes. He moved with purpose. He watched everything. He waited. Ember had not felt curious about anything for years. Now she watched him, and she wondered. Below them both, in the deepest part of the menagerie, waited in darkness. He was a Titan bear from the ice world of. His people had lived there for 10,000 years. They had built cities in the frozen mountains. They had created art and music and poetry. They had loved and fought and dreamed. They called them animals. They came to with fire and metal. They burned the cities. They killed anyone who resisted. They took the strongest and put them in cages. They left the rest to die in the cold. Had watched his entire clan die. His mate, his children, his elders, all of them gone in a single night of fire. He had fought until his body was covered in wounds. Then they had hit him with something that made his muscles stop working, and he had woken up here. That was 6 years ago. He stood 4 meters tall when he rose on his back legs. His white fur was crossed with silver scars. His claws could cut through metal. His strength could crush bone like dry wood. But they had learned how to contain him. They had built walls that shocked him when he touched them. They had installed devices that weakened his muscles. They had taken everything from him except his memories. He remembered everything. In Habitat 7, noticed something strange during the 3rd month of his captivity. The power flickered. It was brief, less than a second. The lights dimmed. The hum of the barriers stuttered. Then everything returned to normal. But had been watching. He had been waiting. And he saw something that changed everything. During that flicker, he looked up. He looked through the transparent ceiling of his habitat, through the levels above, all the way to the highest enclosure. And he saw her. The dragon. She was looking back at him. Their eyes met for less than a second, but in that moment something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, a question without words. "Are you waiting too?" Pressed his palm against the barrier above him. It was a gesture that meant nothing. It should have meant nothing. But far above, in her cage of fireproof metal, Ember saw it, and she understood. She pressed her great head against her own barrier. A response, an answer. "Yes, I am waiting." Saw this exchange. She had been watching, as she always did, looking for new information to add to her mental map of the station. She saw him reach up. She saw him looking at something far above. She followed his gaze and saw the dragon. She had read about dragons in her studies. She knew what they had been. She knew what they had done to them. She knew that the creature above them was supposed to be the last. And now she knew something else. The dragon was not broken. The dragon was waiting. Just like them. That night did not sleep. He lay on the artificial grass and stared at the ceiling and thought about fire. He thought about a creature older than human civilization, locked in a cage, watching him with golden eyes. He thought about what they had built here. They had gathered the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. They had put them in boxes. They had put them close together. They had assumed the boxes would hold. They had assumed wrong. Smiled in the darkness. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who had found something he thought was lost forever. Hoping. In her habitat, Ember breathed a small flame into the air. It was weak. It was barely visible, but it was fire. And fire, no matter how small, could grow. In his frozen prison, opened his eyes in the darkness. He had heard nothing. He had seen nothing. But something in the air had changed. Something was different. He did not know what it was, not yet. But he would learn. They had built a zoo to show their power. They had collected the conquered and the broken and put them on display. They had forgotten the oldest rule of every world that had ever kept dangerous things in cages. Cages could be opened, and the things inside them remembered everything. 3 months passed in the menagerie. The days blurred together like water running over stone, but beneath the surface something was building. Had created a language. It started simple. He would press his palm against the barrier and hold up fingers. 1 finger meant yes. 2 fingers meant no. 3 fingers meant wait. He did this every day at the same time, looking up toward the dragon's habitat far above. Ember learned faster than he expected. Within a week she was responding. She could not use fingers, so she used fire. A single small flame meant yes. 2 flames meant no. A long, slow burn meant wait. It was not enough. Needed more. He needed to share ideas, plans, information. So he invented more signals. He used his hands to draw shapes in the air. He pointed at things and made gestures. He created a silent alphabet that looked like nothing they had ever seen. Ember watched, Ember learned, and then Ember did something that amazed him. She started adding to the language. She created her own signals using the patterns of her flames. She showed him symbols that meant danger, guard, weapon, door, freedom. She had been watching the for longer than he had been alive. She knew things about the station that he could not even guess. They talked for hours each day, moving their hands and flames in careful patterns while the guards walked past without understanding. It was slow. It was difficult, but it worked. Joined them. She had been watching their strange conversation and she had figured out the basic signals on her own. When realized she understood, he almost laughed out loud. He stopped himself just in time. The guards were watching. Now there were three of them. Three minds working together, sharing information, building a picture of the station that grew more complete each day. But they needed more. They needed to reach the others. Was in a habitat on the far side of the human section. He was an engineer who had worked on starships before they captured him. He was older than maybe 40, with gray in his hair and grease stains that would never quite wash off his hands. They had taken him because they wanted to study how humans built machines. They had not realized that studying how humans built machines meant now knew how machines worked. Found a way to reach him. She had noticed that the habitats shared a common air system. The vents were too small for a person to climb through, but sound could travel through them. If you pressed your mouth against the vent at exactly the right angle, your voice would carry. It took 2 weeks of trying, 2 weeks of whispering into metal grates and hearing nothing back. Then one day, a voice answered. Had been trying to reach someone for months. He had almost given up. When he heard his voice coming through the vent like a ghost, he thought he was dreaming. He was not dreaming. They talked every night after the lights dimmed. They talked in whispers that the guards could not hear, told them about the station's systems. He had been watching everything, memorizing everything, understanding everything. He knew where the power came from. He knew how the barriers worked. He knew about the maintenance cycles that happened every 3 weeks. And he knew about. The Titan bear was held in the deepest level of the station. They were afraid of him. They had good reason to be. Even with all their technology, even with all their suppressors and shock walls, had killed 11 guards in 6 years. They had not been able to break him. They had only been able to contain him. Had found a way to communicate with him. The ventilation system in his habitat was different from the others. It was reinforced, designed to handle the cold temperatures the Titan bear needed, but it still connected to the same central system, and sound still traveled. Spoke to in simple words at first. The Titan bear's people had their own language, but they had also learned the common tongue of the galaxy long ago. Understood. More importantly, was willing to listen. When told him about the human who was building an alliance, asked only one question. Does he want to destroy the? Said yes. Then I will help, said, and his voice was like thunder in the dark. There was one more piece to the puzzle. Her name was Myra. She was 12 years old. She had been born in the menagerie. Her mother had died giving birth to her, and they had raised her as an experiment. They wanted to see how a human developed when it had never known freedom. The answer surprised them. Myra was small and thin and quiet. She did everything they told her to do. She never caused trouble. She never fought back. They thought they had created the perfect captive. They were wrong. Myra had learned to be invisible. She moved through the station like a shadow, going places no other human was allowed to go. The guards did not see her as a threat. She was just a child, after all, just a small thing that had never known anything but cages. But Myra remembered her mother's face. She remembered the stories the other humans had told her when she was young. She remembered what freedom meant, even though she had never felt it. And she hated them with a fire that burned deeper than anything ember could produce. Found her during a medical examination. The sometimes moved prisoners between habitats for testing. When was taken to the medical bay, Myra was there, cleaning the floors. Their eyes met, saw the intelligence in those young eyes. She saw the anger hidden beneath the surface. She took a risk. She whispered a single word as she passed by, freedom. Myra did not react. She kept cleaning. But later that night, she found habitat. She pressed her face against the barrier and spoke through the tiny gap at the bottom where the seal was not perfect. "I have been waiting for someone to say that word," she said. "Tell me what to do." Myra became their messenger. She could go places none of them could reach. She memorized information and carried it from habitat to habitat, from level to level. She found the locations of every control panel, every security station, every weapon locker. She counted the guards and learned their names. She discovered where the station commander slept. And she found the prisoners. Deep in the station, in a section marked as storage on the official maps, they kept their special captives. Not animals for the zoo, prisoners of war, leaders and soldiers from a dozen species that had resisted the Empire. They had been held here for years, forgotten by the galaxy, waiting for a death that never came. 700 beings, 700 fighters who had never stopped believing in freedom. When Myra reported this to, he closed his eyes and breathed slowly. Everything was changing. What had started as a desperate hope was becoming something real. Ember watched from above. She had seen many plans fail over her long life. She had watched brave souls try to resist thee and die for their courage. But this felt different. These humans, so small and young and fragile, were building something that might actually work. She added new symbols to their shared language. She taught about the station's weak points, the places where fire could do the most damage. She showed him paths through the structure that they had forgotten. She gave him everything she had. In his frozen cell practiced. He moved his great body in the darkness, keeping his muscles strong despite the suppressors. He remembered the fighting techniques of his people. He remembered how to kill. He had waited 6 years for this. He could wait a little longer. The alliance was complete. A human soldier, a human scientist, a human engineer, a human child, a dragon of ancient fire, a bear of endless strength. They had nothing but their minds, and their will and their refusal to accept the cages that held them. It would have to be enough. Looked up at Ember one final time. He pressed both palms against the barrier, a new signal, one he had created for this moment. "We begin soon." Ember's response was a flame brighter than any she had produced in months. The suppressors should have stopped her. They did not. Soon, the fire said, soon. The festival of acquisition happened once every cycle. The Empire celebrated it by bringing their richest and most powerful leaders to the grand menagerie. They walked through the halls and looked at the creatures in cages. They laughed and pointed and congratulated themselves on their conquests. This cycle they brought 300 dignitaries, governors of conquered worlds, admirals of the fleet, ministers of the Empire. They wore their finest clothes and their proudest smiles. They had no idea what was coming. Had been working on a maintenance drone for 6 weeks. They used these small machines to clean the habitats and repair minor damage. They were not supposed to be able to do anything else. Had changed that. He had the drone's communication systems. He had connected it to the suppressor network that kept all the creatures weak and contained. He had created a feedback loop that would, when activated, shut down every suppressor on the station for exactly 47 seconds. 47 seconds was not long, but had calculated carefully. 47 seconds was enough. The festival began at noon station time. The dignitaries gathered in the main observation hall, drinking expensive drinks and eating food from 100 conquered worlds. They watched the creatures through the transparent walls and talked about how inferior these beings were. Watched them through his own barrier. He saw their faces. He heard fragments of their laughter through the speakers they used to pipe sound into the habitats. He felt nothing but cold patience. He raised his hand. He made the signal. Now. Myra was already moving. She had positioned herself near the central maintenance hub, pretending to clean the floor as she always did. When she saw the signal relay from, She pressed the button had told her about. The drone activated. For a moment, nothing happened. Then every light on the station flickered. Every barrier hummed and stuttered. Every suppressor in every habitat went silent. 47 seconds. Ember felt her fire return like a sun exploding in her chest. The weakness that had held her for years vanished in an instant. She was herself again. She was whole. She did not waste a single second. Her flame hit the barrier of her habitat like a wave of liquid gold. The metal, designed to withstand normal dragon fire, had never faced a dragon at full power. It did not melt. It evaporated. Ember burst through the opening and into the main hall. Her roar shook the entire station. The dignitaries screamed and ran in every direction. Some of them fell. Some of them were trampled. None of them had ever seen anything like this. The last dragon was free, and she was angry. 3 levels below felt the suppressors die. His muscles, weakened for 6 years, suddenly remembered their true strength. He rose to his full height, 4 meters of white fur and silver scars, and he looked at the wall that had held him. He did not burn through it. He did not need fire. He hit the wall with his fist. The wall broke. He hit it again. The hole grew larger. Alarms began to scream throughout the station. Guards ran toward his habitat, weapons ready. They were too slow. Stepped through the shattered wall and met the first wave of guards in the corridor. There were 12 of them. They had shock weapons and armor and years of training. None of it mattered. Moved through them like a storm. His claws cut through their armor like it was paper. His strength threw them against the walls hard enough to break bone. They tried to shoot him. The shots hit his fur and stopped, absorbed by the thick layer of muscle beneath. In 30 seconds, 12 guards were down. Did not stop to check if they were dead. He had more work to do. His barrier had not weakened as much as the others. The human habitats had backup power systems that they considered important, but had planned for this too. A maintenance panel opened in the wall of his habitat. Behind it was a crawl space that Myra had mapped weeks ago. It led directly to the main corridor. Was through it before the guards even realized something was wrong. Followed him, her small body moving quickly through the narrow space. They emerged into chaos, alarms screaming, creatures breaking free, running in every direction. And above it all, the roar of a dragon. The control hub was 3 corridors away. Ran. His body remembered the training that the Marines had given him. His mind remembered the map that had built over months of careful observation. He knew exactly where to go. Guards tried to stop him. 2 of them, young and scared, their weapons shaking in their hands, did not slow down. He hit the first one with his shoulder and took his weapon. He used it to stun the second one before they could fire. Grabbed the second weapon. She had never been a fighter, but she had spent 3 months learning from whispered lessons through the vents. She knew which end to point at the enemy. They reached the control hub in under 3 minutes. Inside, 5 technicians were trying to restore the suppressor network. They looked up when kicked the door open. They saw a human with cold eyes and a weapon. They saw a small woman with steady hands. They saw their deaths. Most of them surrendered. One of them tried to be a hero, shot him before he could touch the alarm. Went to work. Her fingers flew over the control panels, entering codes that had figured out, locking out every command in the system. The station was theirs now, or at least the station's computers were. But they were not here just for escape. Found the communication array. He opened every channel. He broadcast on every frequency the station could reach. The menagerie is open. The cages are broken. If you can hear this, you are not alone. Across the station, the message played through every speaker. The prisoners in their cells heard it. The creatures in their habitats heard it. Even the heard it, though they did not understand what it meant. Not yet. Ember had carved a path through the main hall. Bodies lay behind her, some guards, some dignitaries who had been too slow to run. Her fire had painted the walls black. The beautiful observation platforms were melting slag. She did not care about beauty. She cared about freedom. She found the elevator to the detention levels. The doors were locked. She melted them. Below, in the forgotten section of the station, 700 prisoners heard the alarms and the roars and the distant thunder of battle. They had been here for years. Some of them had given up hope. Some of them had died waiting. But some of them still believed. When Ember's fire lit up the corridor outside their cells, when the locks on their doors suddenly clicked open, they did not hesitate. They poured out of their prisons like water from a broken dam. Soldiers and scientists, leaders and rebels, beings from a dozen worlds who had one thing in common. They hated joined them at the central junction. His white fur was stained red now, but none of the blood was his own. The prisoners looked at him with fear at first. Then they saw his eyes. They saw the rage and the grief and the burning desire for revenge. He was not their enemy. He was their brother. Met them on the upper level. Behind him had full control of the station. The barriers were down. The suppressors were destroyed. The command structure was in chaos. But this was not over. The fleet would come. They would bring warships and soldiers and enough firepower to turn the station into dust. They needed to be ready. Appeared from a side corridor, his hands covered in grease and his eyes bright with exhaustion and joy. He had found the station's weapons systems. He had made them work. Now they could fight. Myra stood at the center of it all, the child who had never known freedom, watching as her dream became real. Her small hands were shaking. Her eyes were wet with tears she refused to let fall. This was just the beginning. Looked at Ember. The dragon was wounded, burned by weapons that should not have been able to hurt her, but her eyes were fierce. Her fire still burned. He looked at. The Titan bear was tired, his great body heavy with the effort of battle, but his claws were ready. His will was unbroken. He looked at the 700 freed prisoners, at End and Myra, at the chaos and fire and destruction all around them. They had broken free. They had broken everything. Now they had to survive what came next. The station had become a fortress. Stood in the command center and looked at the screens that showed every corridor, every junction, every possible entry point. Outside, in the black emptiness of space, the fleet was gathering. 12 warships, 300 fighters, enough firepower to destroy a small moon. They had one station full of freed prisoners and broken machines. It should have been hopeless, but hope was a strange thing. It did not follow the rules of logic. Commander arrived on the third day after the breaking. His ship was small and old and barely holding together. It had once been a cargo vessel. Now it was all that remained of the Human Republic's refugee fleet. Behind him came 11 more ships, each one carrying survivors from worlds they had conquered. When he stepped off his shuttle and saw his uniform, faded and torn but still recognizable as Marine issue, he stopped walking. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Then he fell to his knees and wept. Had spent 10 years believing he was the last of the military leadership. He had watched the Republic burn. He had gathered survivors and run to the edges of known space. He had never stopped hopping, but that hope had grown thin and weak over the years. Now he looked at a young Marine who had done the impossible, and his hope came flooding back. Helped him stand. There was no time for ceremony. There was barely time to breathe. The freed prisoners were organized now. The soldiers among them had taken charge of defense. The scientists had joined in the engineering section, trying to turn the station's systems into weapons. The leaders were planning, arguing, debating strategy in a dozen different languages. But they all agreed on one thing. They would not go back to their cages. They would die first. Ember had become more than a weapon. She had become a symbol. The dragons were legends. Every species in the galaxy knew their stories. They had been ancient when the first starships flew. They had been wise when most civilizations were still learning to use fire. And they had been destroyed, murdered for the power that burned in their chests. To see one alive, to see one fighting alongside the small and fragile humans, changed something in the hearts of those who witnessed it. If a dragon could survive, if she could rise again after everything they had done, then maybe anything was possible. Ember understood this. She did not like being a symbol. She had never wanted to be or feared. But she had lived long enough to know that wars were won in hearts before they were won in battles. So she walked among the freed prisoners. She let them see her. She let them touch her scales if they were brave enough. She told them stories of her people, of the world they had built before the Empire came. And she told them that they could be defeated. She had seen it before. She would see it again. Found others from his world among the prisoners. 17 survivors of, they were not his clan. His clan was dead, their bodies frozen on a world that they had abandoned. But they were his people. They shared his blood. They remembered the same songs. When they saw him, they did not bow or kneel. The people of did not show respect that way. Instead, they pressed their foreheads against his and breathed the same air. They shared warmth in a ritual older than memory. For the first time in 6 years, was not alone. He gathered them in the lower sections of the station, in the cold places that reminded them of home. He taught them what he had learned about fighting the. He shared the rage that had kept him alive. They would stand with him when the fleet came. They would die with him if necessary, but they would not surrender. Worked without sleep for 4 days. His eyes were red, his hands shook, but he would not stop. The station had been designed as a prison, not a fortress. Its weapons were meant to stun escaped creatures, not destroy warships, but saw possibilities where others saw limits. He rewired the suppressor network to create an electromagnetic pulse that could disable fighters. He turned the maintenance drones into bombs. He connected the station's power core to a defense grid that should not have existed. When he finally collapsed from exhaustion, caught him before he hit the floor. She guided him to a bed and made him rest for 2 hours. Then she woke him up because the fleet was moving. Myra had a new job now. She was no longer a messenger. She was a coordinator. She knew the station better than anyone. Every corridor, every room, every hidden passage. She had walked them all in her 12 years of captivity. Now she used that knowledge to move troops and supplies, to find shortcuts and escape routes, to make sure everyone was where they needed to be. The freed prisoners looked at her with wonder. She was so young, so small, but she moved with purpose and spoke with authority. The child born in chains had become something else entirely. On the 7th day, the fleet moved into attack position. Their commander was an old admiral named. He had conquered 17 worlds for the Empire. He had never lost a battle. He looked at the station on his screens and saw nothing but a collection of escaped animals. He offered them terms. Surrender the prisoners. Return the specimens to their cages, and the humans would be granted quick deaths instead of slow ones. Received this message in the command center. Around him stood the leaders of the Alliance, of the human fleet, Ember of the Dragons, of representatives from each of the 12 freed species. They looked at him. They waited for his response. Opened the communication channel. He spoke clearly, knowing that the entire fleet would hear him. We were never specimens. We were never exhibits. We are the beings you forgot to fear. Come and try to cage us again. He closed the channel. For a long moment, there was silence. Then Ember lifted her head and breathed a column of fire that rose through the station's central shaft, visible from every ship in the fleet. It was not a weapon, it was a statement. We are still here, we are still burning. Added his own message. He walked to the observation port that faced the fleet. He stood at his full height, 4 meters of muscle and fury, and he let them see what waited for anyone who tried to board. The freed prisoners cheered. The sound echoed through every corridor of the station. It was the sound of hope refusing to die. Admiral hesitated. He had expected fear. He had expected surrender. He had expected the escaped animals to realize they were beaten and beg for mercy. Instead, he faced defiance. He faced fire and fury and 700 beings who had chosen death over chains. He hesitated for 3 hours. 3 hours of arguments with his officers, of calculations and recalculations, of trying to find a way to win without paying a terrible price. Those 3 hours changed everything. Because while hesitated, the resistance herd's message. Ships began arriving. Small ships, old ships, ships held together by nothing but determination. They came from hidden bases and forgotten outposts. They came from places the Empire thought were empty. They had believed the resistance was dead. They had believed their enemies were crushed, scattered, broken beyond recovery. They had believed wrong. Counted the ships as they arrived, 20, then 50, then more than 100. It was not enough to match the fleet, but it was enough to fight. Looked at the tactical display. He looked at the alliance forming around the station. He looked at Ember and at all the others who had chosen to stand with him. They were outnumbered. They had every reason to run. But they were not running. "We have one chance," he said to the alliance leaders. "We hit them hard. We hit them fast. And we do not stop until they break, or we do." Ember's eyes gleamed with ancient fire. His claws scraped against the floor. Nodded slowly. "Then let us begin," he said. The Battle of Nexus Prime was about to start. The battle began at dawn, station time. Admiral sent his fighters first. 300 small ships, each one carrying weapons designed to cut through armor like knives through flesh. They moved in perfect formation, confident in their training and their technology. They had never fought Ember. The dragon launched from the station like a comet of gold and red. She flew through the vacuum of space, her fire burning even where there was no air. Scientists said this was impossible. They said fire needed oxygen. They said nothing could burn in the emptiness between stars. They were wrong. Ember was not a creature of science. She was a creature of legend. Her fire came from something deeper than chemistry. It came from the heart of stars themselves. She hit the first wave of fighters like a hammer hitting glass. Her flames melted their ships before they could fire a single shot. Her claws tore through metal. Her wings scattered their formations into chaos. 20 fighters died in the first minute, 30 more in the second. By the third minute, the remaining pilots were running. Admiral watched from his command ship. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. He had read about dragons in history books. He had seen images of their bones in museums, but he had never truly believed they were this powerful. He believed now. Inside the station, waited. He knew his part in this battle. He could not fly. He could not fight in space. But they would try to board the station. They always did. He was ready. The first boarding parties came through the lower airlocks. 50 soldiers in heavy armor, carrying the best weapons the Empire could build. They moved quickly and quietly, expecting to catch the defenders by surprise. They found instead. The Titan bear met them in the corridor where the air recyclers hummed. He filled the passage like a wall of white fur and muscle. His eyes were calm. His claws were out. He did not roar, he did not threaten, he simply attacked. The soldiers tried to form a defensive line. They tried to use their training. They tried to remember everything they had learned about fighting large creatures. It did not help. Was faster than anything his size should be. His claws cut through armor. His strength threw soldiers against walls hard enough to leave dents in the metal. He moved through them like a storm, unstoppable, unbreakable. Behind him came the 17 survivors of They were smaller than, but they fought with the same fury. Their people had been destroyed. Their world had been burned. They had nothing left but revenge. The boarding party did not survive. Commanded the station's defense from the central hub. Around him, screens showed every part of the battle. He saw Ember dancing through the fleet. He saw painting the corridors red. He saw the resistance ships engaging the warships in desperate combat. He saw everything. He controlled everything, and he knew they were still losing. The fleet was too strong. For every ship the resistance destroyed, they lost 2 of their own. For every soldier killed, 10 more waited to take their place. Time was not on their side. He needed something more. He needed a miracle. Gave him one. The commander of the refugee fleet had been fighting battles for 10 years. He had learned things about war that the had forgotten. He knew how to use weakness as strength. He knew how to make the impossible possible. While the main battle raged, he took his 11 ships on a different path. He went around the fleet, using the station's shadow to hide his approach. He aimed for the command ship. They did not expect this. Their command ship was protected by layers of fighters and warships. No one would be foolish enough to attack it directly. Was exactly that foolish. His ships burst from cover at maximum speed. They fired everything they had, not at the command ship's shields, but at its engines. The explosions did not destroy the ship, but they crippled it. Admiral felt his ship shudder beneath him. He heard alarms screaming. He saw his tactical display filling with red warnings. His ship was dead in space. He could not run. He could not maneuver. He could only watch as the battle turned against him. The resistance fleet smelled blood. They pressed their attack. Ships that had been retreating now surged forward. Weapons that had been cooling fired again. Electromagnetic pulse activated. 50 fighters went dark, their systems overloaded. They tumbled through space, helpless, as resistance ships picked them off one by one. Coordinated communications between all the Allied forces. She kept everyone connected, everyone informed, everyone working together. 12 species that had never fought side by side moved like a single army. Myra watched the battle from a viewport in the station's upper level. She was too young to fight, but she was not too young to witness. She saw the moment when the fleet broke. It happened slowly at first. One warship, badly damaged, turned and ran, then another, then 3 more. The formation that had seemed so perfect, so unbreakable, began to fall apart. Admiral sent orders to hold. He sent threats. He sent promises of punishment for any captain who fled. His captains ignored him. They had seen the dragon. They had heard about the bear. They had watched their fighters die by the dozen. They ran. By the end of the 2nd day, half the fleet was gone. By the 3rd day, only and his crippled command ship remained. Did not accept his surrender. The admiral had offered no mercy. He deserved none. Ember burned his ship to ash. It took less than a minute. When the fire faded, there was silence, real silence, the kind that comes after something terrible and wonderful has ended. Sat in the command chair and closed his eyes. Around him, the freed prisoners began to cheer. The sound grew louder and louder, filling every corridor of the station, echoing through every speaker. They had won. Not the war. The war would take years more. It would cost lives beyond counting. The empire was vast, and it would not fall in a single battle. But they had won this day. They had proven that the conquered could rise. They had shown the galaxy that cages could be broken. Ember landed on the station's outer hull. Her wings were torn. Her scales were cracked. Blood dripped from a dozen wounds, but her fire still burned. Climbed up through the emergency hatch to join her. His white fur was stained red from head to toe. He was breathing hard. Every muscle in his body ached. Followed them. He stood on the hull of the station, looking out at the stars and the debris of the battle and the distant light of Prime. For a long moment, no one spoke. then asked the question that had been waiting in all their hearts. What now? Ember turned her great head toward the distant star. Her eyes were ancient and full of memory. She had seen empires rise and fall. She had watched civilizations burn and be reborn. She knew what came next. Now we finish what we started, she said. Her voice was tired but certain. Now we remind them why they should never have put us in cages. Smiled. It was the first real smile he had worn since his capture. It was the smile of a man who had found something he thought was lost forever. Purpose. He looked at Ember. He looked back at the station where 700 freed prisoners were celebrating their victory. They had started as exhibits in a zoo. They would end as the force that changed the galaxy. They had gathered the most dangerous creatures in existence and put them in boxes. They had assumed the boxes would hold. They had forgotten that dangerous creatures often made the most dangerous allies. They would not forget again. Years later, when historians wrote about the fall of the empire, they would argue about the causes. Economic collapse, they would say, military overextension, political corruption. But those who had been there knew the truth. It began with a human who refused to break. It began with a dragon who remembered her fire. It began with a bear who never forgot his grief. It ended with the galaxy transformed. And in the central plaza of the rebuilt station, a statue stood, 3 figures side by side facing the stars, a human, a dragon, a bear. Beneath them, carved in stone that would outlast empires, were words that would be remembered for generations. They thought us animals, we proved them wrong. Myra, now grown, visited the statue every year on the anniversary of the breaking. She would touch the stone and remember the day the cages opened. She would remember the fire and the fury and the hope that had seemed impossible. And she would smile, because she knew the truth that they had never understood. It was never about strength or size or technology. It was about will. It was about the refusal to accept defeat. It was about the fire that burned in every heart that had ever known what it meant to be free. They had tried to put out that fire. They had failed. And the galaxy would never be the same.